Okay, now today we will be talking about the what the third war, and I want to take you through a different presentations. I used to do it with a PowerPoint type presentation, but this time, with the help of artificial intelligence, I will do it live with you to get all the information that we need, and then we can have a discussion. So again, let me pull up my screen, this one, and switch over to, yeah, okay. Now, share screen. I want to share screen. Come on, share screen. This one. Okay, share screen. Okay, what you're seeing is a artificial intelligence from X, previously it's known as Twitter. Um, the reason I use this one is because it is capable of searching the web real time. So it is able to uh, use the most current data. At the same time, I will be using another Chinese version of, where are you? Yeah. Uh, okay. Okay. This one is from Tencent. Is the Chinese version of Twitter. And again, it is able to search for the new information. Obviously, although we talk about AI, the language model, what we are using is their language model. That means the AI through learning uh, is seem to understand our questions, and then from that understanding, then they can formulate an answer and get the answer back to us. And that's how I want to use this at the moment. So the first question I want to ask Clock is, please give me a description of the turret war between USA and China, including the first um, first Trump administration, um, include the response from China as well. Okay, so here we go. So it comes back to the answer. Okay, the terror between the United States and China, often referred to the U.S.-China trade war, is a series of escalating trade disputes, primarily characterized by imposing tariffs and other trade barriers, beginning in the first Trump administration. Below is a detailed description. Okay. Background: the U.S.-China trade relationship is complex, marked by significant trade imbalance favoring China. By 2017, the U.S. trade deficit with China is approximately $355 billion, a point of contention for the Trump administration. The administration also accused China of unfair trade practices, in, including intellectual property threats, forced technology transfers, and state subsidies that distorted the market. The trade war began in 2018, driven by U.S. imposing tariffs using national security concerns. China responded with retaliatory tariffs targeting U.S. exports to balance the economic impact. So that started with January 2018. So 30% on solar panels, 20 to 50% on washing machines and the what we call the white commodity, white goods. So March, US announced another 25% tariffs on steel, 10% on aluminum, and April another 25% on 50 billion worth of $50 billion worth of Chinese goods. July, August. Hey, where is the Chinese response? And then July to August, or another 34 billion Chinese goods. In September, another 10% tariffs on 200 billion of Chinese imports. May, after trade wars settled, then raised tariffs on another 200 billions of goods, and so forth. And other measures include banning technologies to Huawei, CTE, TikTok, etc., citing national security concerns. Export control also tightened on advanced technologies, including semiconductors, etc. So the Chinese aim to decouple from the Chinese economy. And where is the Chinese response? After multiple rounds of negotiation, then US and China signed the Phase 1 trade agreement. China committed to buy 200 billion of US goods and services in 2020 to 2021, including $76.7 billion in agricultural products, strengthening intellectual property protection, opening up its financial markets to US firms. In return, US reduced tariffs. Okay, so that is the US side. Chinese response. July, August to August 2018, equally 25% tariffs on $15 billion of US goods. September, another 5 to 10% on another $60 billion of US goods. June, then another 60 billion of US goods up to 25%. And then that will impact on the frozen vegetables and aircraft parts. And then September 19, impose additional tariffs on the $75 billion of US goods, including crude oil, and suspended tariff exemptions for US vehicles. Now, we'll go back a little bit. Look at the amount of goods that is being put on tariffs. In here, initially, China is able to match the amount of the value dollars of the goods. But since China export to US is much larger than the US export to China, it is almost 5 to 1. So very quickly, China ran out of goods to impose tariffs on US goods. So for example, you see that in May, US imposed tariffs on $200 billion worth of goods from China. But in response, China only is able to impose tariffs on $60 billion of US goods. It cannot match the 200 billion good values. And then for the non-tariff measures, China slowed custom clearance for US goods, offset the loss of US agricultural imports, Then China diversify its supplier, including the purchase of soybeans, beef from Brazil and Argentina. China restrict the export of rare earth material. Uh, that is not correct at that moment because the restriction of rare earth minerals only started in 2024. It's not in the first term of Trump's administration. Of course, they maintain discussions. The situation is not as bad as maybe a week before during the second Trump administration. The impact, the American consumer actually bear the brunt of the tariffs imposed. In the beginning, the U.S. importers asked the Chinese exporters to share part of the tariffs. For example, there is a product the U.S. imposed 10%. Then the importer asked the Chinese exporter to reduce the price by 10%. Given the small margin of manufacturing, that is not possible. So eventually, most of the Chinese exporter maintain its price. They do not decrease the price. And therefore, when the goods arrive in the U.S. ports, the importer had to pay the tariffs. And obviously, that will translate into higher price, and therefore it is the consumer who bear the brunt of this tariff war in United States. The Chinese impact. Yes, by the way, there's another way is China started to ship its materials through a third country to minimize the tariffs. I think we rather say it that way. It is the cooperation between the importers in U.S. and the exporter in China to arrange the goods to go to a third country, do a significant change, and then we import into China. Because if you just take the goods from one country and then export it to another country, that is export. Then it is against the law because that means you just put a label on it. It doesn't count that way. So it had to be a substantial change. Now, one of the most cited example is the steel. So many of those steels used in manufacturing, for example, in car, etc. Instead of shipping directly from China, they ship it to Vietnam. And then Vietnam may coat it with zinc to make it corrosion so that it is protected against corrosion. And then that is considered a significant change. And then that is shipped to China. Previously, that process will be done in China, but they take that process out and build a factory in Vietnam and perform it in Vietnam. But the factory itself, the owner, probably is a joint venture between a Chinese manufacturer and a Vietnam business person. So they set up business like that. And we can also notice that the amount of import to Mexico increased significantly. The Canada, US, and Mexico has a North American free trade agreement. That means goods from Mexico going into United States is tourist free, and therefore they bypass any tourists in that way. So there is a lot of other means of uh, doing that. Here it argued that the Chinese economy slowed down by about 0.5% due to this trade disruption because exporter faced a reduced U.S. demand. At that time, the U.S. Ex, the, the export from China to U.S. represent about 20% of Chinese export, total export. Given that China have this experience 4 years ago in 2019, so during the COVID and during the Biden administration, China had already planned for another trade war. So I will go to that a little bit later on. The global supply chain is also disrupted, and therefore the company need to diversify from sourcing their materials away from China to Southeast Asia and India. So that is what I mean by some of the steel go to Vietnam and then do a final processing in Vietnam before sending it to United States. So that is that one. In terms of the India, it put India here, but unfortunately the effort in India is quite minimum in terms of volume, either by mass or by value. The Chinese businesses in India is not very successful. Many of them started a little bit of venture in India and then quickly withdraw. And obviously, at the same time, the demilitarization of China intensifies, especially raising concerns in Hong Kong, Xinjiang, South China Sea, etc. Now, in 2019, there is a huge riot in Hong Kong. It originated from a legislation in the Hong Kong Legislation Council. They want to plug a loophole. The situation started with a murder case in Taiwan. A Hong Kong couple went to Taiwan as a holiday. But in Taiwan, the boy noticed that his girlfriend has betrayed him and is pregnant with a child from other body. So he was angry and somehow he killed his girlfriend, chopped her girlfriend up into pieces, and then load them into briefcase and then drop it in the metro system in Taiwan. Then he come back from Hong Kong. At that time, he also got the girl's bank card, and he take money out from the deceased girl's account. And when the Hong Kong police noticed that, he was arrested. And during questioning, he admitted he had murdered his girlfriend in Taiwan. But unfortunately, there was no extradition agreement between Hong Kong and Taiwan. Now, Hong Kong has many such agreements with the rest of the world, but not with Taiwan, because Taiwan is considered part of China under the One China policy, which is recognized worldwide, including the United Nations. And therefore, any treaty with China, that is China. But when you deal with Taiwan, which is not directly ruled by the current Chinese government in mainland China, then it is a different matter. Hong Kong want to send this boy back to Taiwan for trial. And he want to go back to Taiwan for trial as well. Hong Kong cannot try him on the murder because it is not within the jurisdictions of the Hong Kong legislation system or the criminal system. So Hong Kong cannot try him on his murder. Hong Kong can only try him on his taking money from that girl. So when this boy served, I think 3 years, something like that, in Hong Kong prison for stealing the money, he in the prison, he already wanted to go to Taiwan to face justice, but the Taiwanese government has been refusing his entry. So at the moment, this man is still in Hong Kong, not faced the justice of murdering his girlfriend, although I think he repented, but he haven't faced any consequence. So the Hong Kong government want to legislate so that even when there is no official extradition treaties, we can still send this man to Taiwan. But of course, that evolved into a color revolution in Hong Kong, and 2019 see a big disruption of civil services and civil amenities damaged by the rioters. But of course, the Western media paint it as a fight for democracy, whereas for people in Hong Kong, including myself, you can fight for democracy, but you don't have the right to damage public properties as well as bullying, hitting, killing other people who don't agree with you. Now, there are a lot of damage to public properties. I don't want to repeat that. But in particular, I want to stress that a number of innocent Hong Kong people were seriously hurt. For example, there's a taxi driver who passed through a demonstration area, and then somehow the protester in other en route on the same road noticed this taxi, and one of the rioters jumped on board, turned the wheels, and then the taxi hit on another protester and then run onto a wall. And this taxi driver was taken out and beaten almost to death. Another incident is on the Hong Kong Island side, and there is a van driver who is doing small goods delivery, and he passed through a region. The road was blocked by the rioters using those some of the materials in the road. So he come down and tried to remove the roadblocks, but he was again seriously beaten. Another bystander was being thrown a flammable liquid and then lights up. He is still undergoing burn surgery at this as the point as I'm saying it. Another old man was hit by a stone thrown by the rioters, and that old man passed away about 4 days later. Another young man was hit with one of those metal cover of the drain, which is a heavy metal part on the head. What is his condition now? I don't know. Another Chinese journalist entering Hong Kong airport was beaten up, and he was tied to a trolleys and then being beaten up. And he passed away about 3 years later. But anyway, I consider that riots. You want to have democracy, and in the situation in Hong Kong, I don't think it is at the point that needs um, blood, unlike, for example, the case in Gaza. But anyway, that's okay. Now, 2021 to present. Okay, and then for the response, okay, conclusion. Hey, you don't give me any information about the current what about the Trump second term. Mm. Stop. Let me read. Second term. Um, Trump took office on the 20th January 2025. And on the 1st of February, so that is only about 10 days later, he signed an executive order declaring a national security emergency over drug trafficking, alleging China providing a safe haven for the um, pre-drugs. So fentanyl is a medical drug which is used to reduce pain, especially for those patients in the terminal state of their life. So it is a legal medical drug, but unfortunately, it can also be abused. Fentanyl is abused because of its strong ability of reducing pain, as well as it can be manufactured very cheaply. And the manufacturing is usually done in Mexico. So the in Mexico, underground cartels in Mexico take some preliminary chemicals and then combine it into fentanyl, fentanyl, and then ship it to U.S. So this fentanyl problem is huge. In United States, approximately 30,000 people die every year due to drug overdose. So the Trump administration blamed that on Canada, Mexico, and China, and they imposed a 10% tariff on all Chinese imports. In March, it raised to 20%, signaling a rapid escalation. Okay, and then the so-called liberation date on April 2nd, 2025. Trump announced a reciprocal tariffs on all countries trading with United States. And the tariffs the formula of that one is very easy to calculate. If United States have a trade surplus, then it is 10%, 10% tariffs. If the United States have a deficit, then it is the amount of deficit divided by the trade volume and then divide by 2. And that becomes the reciprocal tariffs. So it imposed a 34% tariffs on all Chinese imports. The China responded 1 day later on also 34% of all United States imports. Trump was very unhappy and say China retaliated. So he raised another 50% on all Chinese imports, making it 84% now, plus the 20% before and the 10% before for other reasons. China responded with another 50%, raising to 84%. Trump was furious. So he raised it to 125% and later on up to 145%. When Trump raised to 125%, China responded with an equal amount of tariffs, 125% on all US imports to China. And at the same time say that any further numerical games China is not following, because basically at 125% tariffs, any trade basically stopped. There's no way a product which before the tariffs is, let's say $10 becomes 20 something dollars because you add 125% on it. So maybe the $10 goods coming are selling at the stores in China may import into China at $50. But once you add the 125% onto it, it becomes $125. Then if the supply chain, the whole chain, want to make the same percentage of profit, that it will be $250. So it make no sense because it used to be $100, now $200 and something dollars. You won't buy it unless you have no replacement. Unless you have no replacement. So that is a critical point I want to discuss with you a bit later on. But anyway, so that is tick-tack. The reason for this reciprocal tariffs is based on the emergency declaration by Trump, because it's declared a national emergency. And under this emergency, the right to impose tariffs is taken away from the U.S. Congress and transferred into U.S. President's hand. And therefore, Trump is able to impose these ridiculous tariffs on all the trading partners. Basically, everyone, even those with trade surplus, U.S. have trade surplus, is still 10%. So that is what Trump called the baseline tariff. The argument put forward is that U.S. want to balance the trade deficit and also want to reindustrialize, bringing production manufacturing back to United States. So very quickly, under the huge pressure from the electronic um, companies in China, including Apple. Then Trump said all electronics equipment from China is exempted from these tariffs. During all this time, Trump is expecting China will call him, expecting Xi Jinping to call Trump. But unfortunately, that telephone never happened. Last Saturday, China has a meeting in Switzerland under the request of the United States delegation. They meet in Switzerland. That meeting extended into the afternoon, except a lunch break. We don't know whether the lunch break they are having the lunch separately or together. But anyway, we know that they meet in the morning and then they continue the meeting in the afternoon. At the late hours in the afternoon, they announced that they will continue discussion on Sunday. The discussion ended quite late on Sunday, and then they said they will have a communicate, that means a joint statement of their meeting on Monday. Now today is Monday. I still haven't seen that communicate yet. So probably I think they will be working overtime to draft a public statement so that both sides will agree to. But anyway, from the little information we know is the meeting has been very honest. They exchange their ideas and is very productive. I don't know what does it mean by productive. Anyway, that is the situation at the moment. Now, in terms of the trade, the main shipment from China to United States enter into United States through the West Coast, which is Los Angeles and Long Beach. And also some of those goods will go through the Panama Canal and then arrive into the East Coast. The Chinese shipment from China to United States in the West Coast is about 30 days. And to the East Coast, you have to add another 15 days, about 2 weeks. So starting from 2nd of April, when Trump announced these tariffs, all the cargoes which is already en route, that means is on the container ship, will be exempted from the tariffs. Only all those goods which will put onto the container ship after 2nd of April US Western time will be subject to tariffs. So we are expecting the amount of shipments from this week onward will drop. So let's look at the ports. This is a live data from the port for this week, May 11, which is week 20, and then 21 and 22nd, and then anything later is very unreliable. Now we know that last week, week 19, the amount of containers arriving in the West Coast dropped by 30%. this number against last week raised about 40%, but against 1 year before dropped by 12%. And then next week there's still a little bit of rise, but the main hit come on May 25th, the week 22. The expected cargo dropped by half, and compared to previous year also dropped by half. That means the impact of these tariffs will start flowing into the commercial market maybe in August or September in United States, because a lot of the importers has expected that with the new Trump administration, there will be tariffs, especially against China. So during the few weeks in 2025, January, and all the weeks last year in the second half of 2024, the trade volume between China and United States actually increased. So we suspect a lot of those trade is the importers expecting tariffs. So they store up their goods in warehouses in United States and then wait for the tariffs to start. And the first quarter GDP of United States dropped, not raised, dropped by 0.5%, a slight drop. In terms of that drop, some of the economists argue that it is because of the larger imports of Chinese goods in the first quarter of 2025. Again, meaning a lot of importers is expecting a trade dispute with China, and therefore they are importing goods in preparation for the trade war. So I will argue the real impact on United States will be in the summer, still a few months ahead. The economists estimated that this trade tariffs will represent a consumer price index rise of 2 to 2.5%. At the moment, the United States CPI, the consumer price index, is sitting at 3.4%. So that will push the consumer price index again to about 5 to 6% region. But I think I will stop it. Okay, there's one more thing I want to share with you before I. Here is a interview of the U.S. Treasurer in Fox News. So I will move the look at the U.S. position.
Next a couple of months. What's your time in this sector?
Well, again, Maria, as I said, the Chinese need to de-escalate these high tariffs, because there is the equivalent of an imperative in the Chinese business model is built on selling cheap goods to the U.S. They sell us about 5 times more than we sell them. So, their factories are closing down as we speak. We're going into the holiday season. Orders are placed for that now. So if those orders aren't placed, it could be devastating for the Chinese.
Okay, so they argue that the China needs to de-escalate when the escalation itself originated from US. And from here, I want to explain to you why I think China doesn't need to de-escalate. China now, as I have said before, the export percentage of the total export for the United States has now dropped to about 16% of the total Chinese export. So if all the trade stops, then a 16% drop in China's exports. But let's roll back a few years. The Chinese exports since COVID has been rising at about 7%. So if it is at 7%, then every 5 years, the trade will double because it is compound. Starting from 2018, China undergo the tariff war, and Chinese government has sent out a directives to most of the manufacturers in China, asking them to diversify their markets, to sell their products to elsewhere. And there's another thing the Chinese government also asks the Chinese consumer is to consider what they call a double circuit. There is an external circuit. That means we are selling goods to other countries, and then we are buying goods from other country. So that is the external circuit. And there's another internal circuit. That means the Chinese manufacturing goods for the Chinese consumers, and the consumers buy the goods and then get the economy also running. So that is the domestic circuit. So during this trade war, the Chinese government created this policy to encourage both the domestic consumptions. So how to encourage domestic consumptions? Well, subsidize the Chinese consumers. So they enter into a program which will improve the efficiency of their household goods, the refrigerators, the air conditioners, the washer, etc., in a program of replacing the old with the new, with a government subsidies of about 10% of the price. That has created a boom in the Chinese manufacturing and absorbed quite a bit of these trade disputes. And at the same time, they are diversifying. Now, as from the AI information, we already know the main products China buy from the United States are soybeans, wheat, and other agricultural products, including beef, chicken, pork, etc. These are commodities easily replaced from other countries. Another big area is the energy. So United States forced China to sign up to a long-term LNG supply, the liquefied natural gas. But I don't know which clever mind put into the contract that the delivery is not necessary into Chinese port. It will consider sold to China as long as China take that shipment from the United States port. We all know what happened in 2020 when Russia and Ukraine enter into war. There's a lot of sanctions against the Russians. So suddenly, the LNG supply to Europe was disrupted by these sanctions. We all know that in 2022, the energy price in Europe raised rapidly, and in some instances, almost 10 times is as before the war. So a lot of this LNG, instead of sending to China, was diverted into Europe. And of course, the Chinese importers make a huge profit from all this. I don't know who is so clever to do that. Then, on the other hand, we had the question of how did China cope without all this LNG, all this natural gas? Well, it so happened the pipelines from Russia to China was completed in 2021, and therefore China redirected all the energy requirements from the United States to Russia. The same situation happened in this second round of trade war. China is the world's largest soybean consumer. 40% of the American soybean is actually sold to China. Under this trade war, China redirected all these soybean imports to Brazil. Actually, it was managed about 2 years ago. China helped Brazil to build some ports and some railway to export soybeans, and the farmers in Brazil is actually encouraged to plant soybeans and wheat for Chinese market. In terms of the beef, chicken, and pork, now during our Morrison time, because of the political tensions, our beef cannot be sold to China. But now China redirected all the beef requirement to us. So we are shipping our beef to China instead of the American beef to China. In terms of the other gas, etc., as I said before, it can be taken from the Russia. What about those export to United States? You know, the Trump administration have a red cap, MEGA, make America great again, that cap. You will look closely, then the label of that cap said, designed in America. And then on the back of that label, it will say manufactured in China. So it is very ridiculous to say that although the Trump administration want to decouple from China, its own merchandise are actually manufactured in China. The dependency of Chinese products is huge. For example, Walmart, Target, all the other mainstream stores all source their products from China. At the moment, we are seeing a little bit of increasing import into American. Most of that has been directed to Canada and stored in the pre-tax warehouses in Canada, and hoping that somehow when the terrorist war settled, then these goods can be shipped into United States. The pressure on a number of U.S. companies, including Amazon, about 80% of Amazon products come from China. About 90% of products in Walmart come from China. So the Americans are very dependent on China. And as I said, Apple makes all their iPhones. No, not all. They have now have a assembly in India, but most of the iPhone is still manufactured in China, and therefore the Americans exempt all electronic products from China of their tariffs under the pressure. But I don't know how long Trump can withstand the pressure from the other retailers to remove that tariffs. But anyway, last weekend they started talking. I think in the joint statement, it will be something like we'll continue to talk. I think that is the most positive statement that can be made at this moment. I don't know whether that will be any better than that. Another anecdote information is that there is a shipment from Brazil to China of soya beans. The Chinese customs tested the DNA of the soya bean and said this soya beans is not produced by Brazil, but rather is a product of United States, and they rejected the shipment, and the shipment had to go back. That means the Chinese is very vigorous in terms of stopping any trade between China and United States, where the United States is desperate to resume the trade, at least to a lot of people. But anyway, what we have seen is the rapid changes of the U.S. stock market. You go up, you go down, you go up, you go down. It all depends on an announcement or a tweet from President Trump. The stated objective. Okay, let me stop the share. Have I stopped the share? Yes, I have. Sorry. Okay, rather than continue, I may let you ask questions. Anyone? No questions? So I will continue.
Alfred, I've got a question. Sorry.
Yes, please.
Can I ask a geopolitical question rather than an economic question? I was surprised to read the other day that in the Indian-Pakistani conflict, China seems to be favoring Pakistan. Now, considering what I think is Pakistan is quite a ultra conservative, made up of lots of radical Muslim Islamists and terrorists and things like that. And China had a problem with or has a concern about the Uyghur people, that they may be radicalized by some of the Asian sort of Islamist countries. I'm surprised that China would align themselves with a extreme Muslim country.
Very good question, Peter. And then let me pull up a map first. Pakistan. Okay, where are you, Pakistan? Okay. So I will share that screen with you guys. Then we'll talk about that. Okay. Here, share screen, and this is Google Map. Okay. China is here. You can see my cursor.
Yep.
Now, if China want to trade with United States, that's easy. Just go over this very big Pacific Ocean, okay?
Yes.
Then we'll reach United States. If China want to trade with Europe, what they do? Well,
Well,
the
stuff
shipment
the
go down the South China Sea,
yeah.
turn around in the Market Street
Yep.
around Singapore,
Yep.
pass through the Sea of Bengal, and then Arabian Sea, enter into Gulf Aden, Red Sea,
Yes.
Suez Canal, meet Mediterranean Sea, and then to
Yep.
Europe. What if? What if United States block all the maritime traffic at this point here in
Yes.
Singapore?
Yes.
Now, China still import quite a bit of energy from Middle East. All the Middle East oil also go through here around the Mecca Street up the South China Sea to China.
Yes.
What if China have a port here in Pakistan?
Right.
The Pakistan go through into Xinjiang and then from Xinjiang directly into the rest of China. That it will bypass the restriction at South China Sea, the Market Street, Singapore, etc. So it makes geopolitical sense to open up other routes to let trade continue.
Yes.
So Pakistan has always been quite friendly with China. The main reason is we know the history of India and Pakistan. In the 1940s, when India get independence, then India undergo a very serious internal fight between the Hindus and the Muslims.
Yep.
These two groups of people has been living side by side as neighborhoods for hundreds of years. But when British left India and India becomes independent, somehow these two group of people no longer able to stand against each other. So the Muslim is being pushed into two separate areas. One is the Bangladesh, and other is Pakistan. And at that time, Bangladesh is actually called the Bangladesh is actually called the East Pakistan. With Indian influence, the East Pakistan became today's Bangladesh. Basically, break up with Pakistan. Bangladesh, Pakistan are mainly Muslim populations. There are still a little bit of Muslim within India. Now, Muslim by itself is not necessarily an extreme groups. There are radical elements within almost every religion, including Christianity. That is unavoidable because it is a bell curve, and most of people in the middle. But there will be somebody at the extreme anyway. Whether that extreme will be using force or using terror to achieve their aims It all depends on the other political pressure applied to them.
But Albert, if I can just interrupt for 1 minute,
Yes,
um,
please.
neither Christianity or Hindu or Judaism or any of the other religions have in their Bible the direction to make a world caliphate, that everybody has to either believe in Allah or if not, they're slaves to Islam and things like that. It's quite specific in the Quran. So isn't that a bit
Yeah,
of a
yeah, I agree. I totally
concern?
agree. Yes. But we also have to notice that, for example, take the Christianity, Islam, and what is um, the religion in Israel? That's
Judaism.
called
Judaism.
Judaism. They all have the same Old Testament. Of course, they call it differently. Okay, the Old Testament in Christianity is actually the four books in Judaism, and Islam's also have the same so-called genesis of the world. They believe in the same God, basically, but it's only different how you worship the God is different. And of course, Christianity has an added of Jew, Jesus, Jesus, and then is a son of God and changed Judaism into Christianity. And then about 500 years later, then Prophet Muhammad becomes the last prophet, and he created Muslim, another kind of worship of the same God, whether you call it Allah or Yahweh or God, etc. It's still the same God because they all originate from the Middle East.
But
It's the same.
if you know your history, after Muhammad, even after he died, the Christian the Muslims considered Christianity and Judaism as religions of the God of the one God. They acknowledged that, but Christians and Jews were considered second-class citizens.
Yeah,
You know your history about that?
yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. And same for other religion.
All
Now,
right, I'll speak.
all
I'll,
these
I'll give a
religions
ring soon. I'm just on
worship is one
on
God,
computer now. Yeah.
what's called monotheist. Okay, the monotheistic God religion all has exclusion of anybody who doesn't believe in the same way you believe in. Even within Christianity, there are so many different sects. Catholics, the um, what's that called in Russia?
Coptic Christians and
Yeah,
Orthodox,
there are different types of
Orthodox,
Christians.
but none of them considered Islam, sort of Muslim people, as second-class citizens, but the other way
Well,
around as well.
it all depends on history. At some point in time, they all consider anybody who doesn't believe in the same way is worthy of killing. For
I don't,
example,
I don't think
the
it's written in their Bibles, though. I don't think it's in their Bibles, but it is in the Quran.
um, I have been reading the Bible. Okay, so if you want to, you can. Uh, but my reading the Bible is both in English as well as in Cantonese, together with a friend. So I have a channel to that. So I have been reading the Bible. For example, in one of those they call the teachers, okay, in the Old Testament, the Jewish people is asked to kill every living thing when they conquer a city. Anyone who doesn't believe in the same God, the same way the the Jews believe in is worthy of killing. So it depends on time. For example, the what's that called? During the uh one 11th century to about the 14th century, when um the Europeans constantly at the Crusades, they have been fighting the Crusades for almost 500 years, and the motivation is again, you are believing in the same God, but you worship it in a different way. So we will try to conquer you to gain control of your way of. So it is what we call a
Well,
50 steps, laughing at the 100 steps.
the Crusades wanted to retake um, what's it called? The city from the Ottoman Empire. They wanted to take Istanbul from
Yeah,
the Ottoman Empire. It wasn't to take, and on the other, and also Judaism is certainly not a religion that wants to make other people Jewish, because it's absolutely opposite. It is
yeah,
very difficult to become Jewish because they think they're God's chosen and they're a small community and they don't want other people to join in.
yeah,
So,
but
but
they
it's
want
the
to rule the
opposite
world.
to, it's the opposite to Islam. The
But
complete
anyway, we diverse. But anyway, so the Chinese and Pakistan has been a very close relationship, and we know that there are skirmishes between India and China about the border. They have fist fights against each other. Now, the the fight against between India and China has always been limited to cold weapons. They both sides restrain themselves from using hot weapons. So there's no guns shooting at each other. They are only fist fighting, stick fighting, and so forth. So that has been controlled. But India had this very strange mentality. In the 1984, about that, just about the time China opened up, the GDP per capita between India and China is about the same, with India slightly ahead. India population has now surpassed China to become the world's most populous country. But both of them has about 1.4 billion people, almost the same. India surpassed China by a little bit. India proclaimed itself as the world's largest democracy. Everybody is saying India can overtake China anytime, very soon, anytime, very soon. But by now, China's GDP per capita is about 4 times the GDP per capita of India. India has always been thinking we will overtake China, we will overtake China. But the gap has been increasing rather than decreasing. What happened last week? A group of tourists in a contested area between India and Pakistan was killed in a terrorist act. India said it was backed by Pakistan and therefore start striking some of the terrorist camps in the Pakistan area. The Pakistan reacted by fighting back. So they have exchanged a barrage of missiles, and they have been bombing each other by bomb shells and shooting each other by gun for the past week. I think 2 days ago or 3 days ago, about 70 to 80 uh, Indian planes want to target some targets within Pakistan. Pakistan responded by sending up, I think it's 20 fighter jets, and they managed to shoot down 3 Rafale, the fighters from France, 1 MiG-29 from Russia, another Su-30 again from Russia, shot down 5 planes, and 1 drones from Israel. And then the India retaliated by another round of missiles. And then Pakistan also retaliated with another round of missiles, including hitting some of the airfields of the military Indian air defense. But at the moment, then both countries call for a ceasefire, and they sign off on the ceasefire. But the ceasefire doesn't cease the fire. Actually, they are still bombing each other. Now, at the same time, when this terrorist attack occurred, Indian blocked off the downstream water, which runs through a river in Pakistan. That will put 80% of the Pakistan population into waterless season, when it is time to plant, when they need water. So Pakistan considered that it is a declaration of war. And even when gunfires may cease, but the water need to float again. That is another contentious point at the moment. They are fighting each other, and China is supporting Pakistan, and Russia is supporting India. When Russia and China is supporting each other against you in other geopolitical situations. Okay, any other questions? Okay, next week will be also on the trade dispute, and I don't know whether we will have anything new, or we want to go anything more detail. I will try to make next week going into more detail, explaining the rationale and the economic impact. So, is there any other questions? In that case, thank you for your attention. We'll see each other next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Albert.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.